Welcome back to this episode of Tubules Live. We now have our question and answer session, and we've had lots and lots of questions sent in online, so we'll get started. The first one is from Louise Liston. She says, what is the quickest method of mailing patients after their SMS or text recall has failed? I flag them up with a pop-up to check the details for the future, but is there a facility on the recall list to pick up undelivered SMS and emails to write to them without having to check undelivered items?
So the first thing to say is where an SMS or email fails, what we recommend people to do is to delete the SMS number or the mobile number, the SMS number or the email address from within the patient record. That way, when they come back in, the new workflow manager will prompt for those messages. Secondly, if somebody, the other thing to say is if you don't have that workflow manager switched on at the moment, and you have version 11. Question we're often asked is, why can't I see it? If you just ring the support desk, they'll switch it on for you, no problem.
And importantly, even with the new automated recall manager, if there have been failures to deliver, you can go in and identify the individual patients and carry out individual mail merge and generate a letter if appropriate, or an email if the text has failed. So you have the ability to identify those patients and forward out an immediate response.
The second one is from Sarah Fid. The question is about automating recalls. Can I choose to only automate at current, next and previous months? Other extended recalls to be triggered manually via Recall Manager?
The practice chooses how many points in time that they want to reach out to the patients. The example I had there showed those due next month, this month and last month. There was also one into recalled again in a year if we haven't heard back from them for a year. But the practice chooses how many points in time that they want to reach out to their clients.
I guess just to add to that, if you wish to send manual recalls at any time to supplement what you're doing automatically, that's absolutely possible. There's no that functionality hasn't disappeared. I'd also add that if you don't want to do automated recalls in version 11, that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to follow what we recommend as best practice, again, that's absolutely fine. Our recall team will help you set up automated recalls to do exactly what you want it to do. You don't have to follow our best practice.
How do you get a patient to pre-book their next appointment when they don't really want to?
That's a great question. I think at the end of the day, you kind of can't really. But for somebody like myself, if you asked me to pre-book my patient, pre-book my next appointment 6 months in advance, I'm probably just not going to be able to do that. So there's a couple of important points here. So first of all, one of the things that people very often say to me as I go travelling around and talking to people is, I don't need a recall process because I pre-book all of my patients 6 months in advance. And when you go into Recall Manager and look at the data there, what you very often find is that they think they pre-book all their patients 6 months in advance, but there's actually quite a large trail of patients that are not getting pre-booked. So it's really important to have that recall process there set up. I guess you can't force them, but I think one of the other really important points here is it is really worth trying to do if you can, because we can see in the data that it does work, but we can't see why it works. But here's what we think. We think the reason that it works is that if I make a commitment to come back to your practice in 6 months' time, chances are I may or may not be able to actually do that, and I may have to call you to change that appointment. But crucially, at that point, I'm calling you to change my appointment, and I guess I'm somewhat on the back foot because I'm now changing a commitment that I've made. When we first started looking at the data, I said to the team, booking patients 6 months in advance, that just can't work, surely. I just didn't believe that it could work. But the data is absolutely clear. It definitely does work, and if you don't do it, think about giving it a try. It's worth doing.
Next question is from Ian McLean. He says, I have some patients, particularly elderly ones, who only have a landline with no intention of getting email or a mobile. Will Workflow Manager keep requesting reception to collect this missing data?
Workflow Manager, you can set it so that it stops asking for emails or mobiles for a year for those individual patients. But after a year, it will prompt again. So importantly, if the patient's coming in for a series of treatment appointments, ask at the first appointment whether we can have a mobile. If they haven't got one, then it won't keep asking them during the first of the denture fits, second of the denture fits, third of the denture fits. It would only pose the question via reception in a year's time.
I think another important point is Workflow Manager is very configurable. If you don't want it to prompt for telephone numbers, you actually can switch that off completely. If you don't want it to prompt for email addresses or payments, you can switch that off completely. So it's highly configurable. You can make it do what you want it to do.
We've got a question from Sarah Fid. She says, you were speaking about achieving 85% target recall effectiveness. At what point is this? Is it after 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months?
Great question. Okay, so the answer is that number is taken at the end of 60 days from the date of the recall. So this raises quite an important point. So at the moment, if you run a manual recall process, what happens is once a month or perhaps twice a month, you send out a batch of recalls and they all go out together. That concept is gone once you automate. Why? Well, what it's doing is the system is responding to an actual day, an actual date. So 1 month to the day before the recall's due, it will send out the first batch. On the day that the recall's due, it will send out the second batch. And on 1 month to the day after, it will send out the third batch. So it is responding, it is staggering the recall communications evenly through the month, rather than sending them all out in one giant batch. So spreading the workload on reception.
Next question is from Graham Murray. Can I separate private patients from Demplant patients when sending recalls to send at separate times?
Yes, you can. Recall Manager is astonishingly configurable. You can identify particular groups of patients, for example, private and Demplant, and choose to send them different messages at different points in time and delivered by different methods. So yes, very much so.
Yeah. You can also, I think another important point is it is possible to differentiate by individual provider or by provider type in terms of the way you do your recalls. So it might be that you say, I want to follow one process for dentists and a different process for hygienists. Or it may be that you say, I want to have a different process for each of the different dentists working in the practice. So it can be around the individual or around the provider type. It's highly configurable. We can make it do what you want it to do.
So I hope that will encourage you to automate your recalls.
Next question is from Tina Price. Are you aware of any innovative ways to collecting mobile and email details from patients?
I haven't been asked that one before. Okay.
So, if I may, a starting point for that, if you're enabling your patients to book online, and patients are coming to you through your website, then part of the online booking process requires patients to give you their mobile number as part of that process. You'd be guaranteed of getting that at that stage. Certainly making sure that the system is prompting innovative ways of getting patients to give you that detail.
Yeah, I think possibly what you could do is say, look, one of the things that we find is that patients find the convenience of online booking, quite good. You can do it at home in the evenings. You don't have to call the practice anymore. It's like booking if you think about booking an airline ticket, Yeah, I find that process a lot more pleasant than I used to, because I can do it online. I used to have to ring and speak to a person, and then you're kind of, you're under pressure to try and sort of figure it all out then and there. Whereas if you're doing it online, the pressure's off. You can figure out your holiday plan. You can work out where you're going to, when and where you want to be, and you can look at all the options and book the time that is right for you, the flight that is right for you. And I think it's a similar thing with with booking a dental appointment. You can sit at home, look at your diary, figure out when you can go, look at the available appointments, and select the one that works for you.
I think if patients are reluctant to give you their mobile or give you their email address, it's because they haven't seen the benefits to them in the practice having that detail. So if your practice has a cancellation, you charge a cancellation, a fail to attend fee or a late notice cancellation fee, then certainly the advantage to the patient in giving you that detail is the reminders that they will receive. They're less likely to fail. They get more notice of that appointment, so if they need to cancel, they'll give you the sufficient notice to avoid that fee. But if the patients see the benefit of you having that detail, then they'll give you the information.
Good question. That got us thinking.
Next question is from Sarah Henry. Does your SMS messages have to be set up through Software of Excellence to benefit from the automated service?
Good question. So there is the ability within Exact to send SMS messages via a third party. That is still there and does exist. If you want to receive responses and if you want to take advantage of some of the more advanced features that we've covered this evening, yes, it does have to be set up through our gateway, and the reason is that it needs to be able to interact backwards and forwards through the gateway, and there's some logic in the gateway that Exact communicates with in order to make that happen.
We have a question from Nuala McVie. With the 3 types of recall, aren't we possibly being at risk of being too pushy? Is there a fine line between pestering and effective reminders?
So I think the answer is, first of all, it's up to you how you recall patients. So if you don't want to go for 3 communications, that's fine. We'll set it up the way you want it to work. But what we find is that I think one of the things that's really important is the tone of the message. So if the message is pushy or sort of too direct, then I think you do run the risk of getting that response. However, if the tone of the message expresses concern for the patient's health, then I don't. I think it's unlikely that we would see that sort of viewed in that way. Certainly, I guess the question is, what's worse, having the odd patient who feels like you've pestered them a little much, in which case it's actually quite easy to fix for that individual patient. You can exclude them, or driving recall effectiveness for the practice as a whole. And I guess I would suggest that it's more important to make sure that your practice is pulling your patients back in on a regular basis. And look, if it offends the occasional patient, maybe just exclude them from the process. So, yeah.
We end up moving our patients around a lot if a dentist or hygienist cancels or changes the day if a patient is due. Our recall system relies on one person spotting and changing the patient's recall date. Will automating help this problem get solved?
So let me see if I've understood the question. What I think you've indicated is that your clinicians are changing their dates of holiday and so forth, and for patients that haven't yet got an appointment but have a recall with that particular provider, will the automation cope with that? Yes, it will. Because what the automation will do, it's not dependent on whether or not the provider is available. The recall will go out because the recall date is due, not because the provider themselves is available. If you have online booking, then as the holiday dates and the clinician's diary are shown in the diary, then the availability through online booking is automatically changed.
Yeah.
So yes, in those circumstances it will.
Yeah. I think it raises quite another quite important question, a sort of a secondary but related question, which is, how do you deal with patients that get lost with respect to recall dates? I think I'd suggest you do run a report within your practice, just out of interest. What you should do is have a look at the total number of patients you saw last month, and then have a look at the total number of recalls that you issued last month, and have a look at the difference between them. What we very, very frequently see is that a practice might see 100 patients in a month, but only issue 50 or even quite often less recalls. And the reason is that patients have not had recall dates set at all in the first place. We won't step you through the process here and now of how to fix that, but suffice to say, if you ring the support desk, there is a report that you can run. It's very straightforward, that will allow you to pull those patients back within your recall process. And that's really, really important, because if you have patients with no recall date set at all, then they sit outside your recall process. So you will never issue a recall to them. So it's very important that you do reach out to them.
Next question is from Dean Saville. So how much is it to upgrade to version 11?
If you use version 10 and you're on support, then there's no charge. You can either ring the support desk or simply log onto the support portal, and on the support portal you will find that you can just download the latest version and install it. And if you're on support, that's an easy process.
It's important to clarify that version 11 is, as Ben's outlined, available to those who have support. The elements that we've spoken of outside version 11, such as online booking, SMS replies, those are optional elements. It's important to clarify
that's an important point. There are a couple of things. The majority of what we've presented to you here this evening, there's no additional charge for if you're on support, but we do charge for the online booking module, and the SMS replies piece also carries a small monthly charge. It's £10 a month, and the reason is that we have to hire what's called a virtual mobile number so that your patients have a number to reply to. If they don't have a number to reply to, it can't go anywhere. So, yeah.
How do you back up Exact if it is constantly running Utilization Manager?
Great question. So we know that in old versions of Exact, there was at times the files could be locked, and this would prevent backups from running properly. So what we've done is we've changed that in version 11, so that the pieces of the software that read the database to run backups that read the database to run things like online booking and utilization manager don't lock the files, so your backups will run without a problem whilst they're running. So be assured we have given that consideration in the design.
Question from Helen Faulkner. We are a fully private practice, and although the evidence shows that recall effectiveness improves using the SMS, email and letter, do you or did practices feel their patients felt that they lost the personal touch, meaning they're texting and emailing but not actually speaking to the member of staff?
I think the intent, when we went and looked at what the top 5% of practices were doing, what we found is that they were following this process that we've recommended. And I think in large part some of that success was probably due to the fact that they'd unloaded reception quite substantially, and that they were able to spend more time with their patients while they were in the practice. So I guess to a certain extent, there is a risk that the increased electronic communication, increased paper communication does remove an element of the personal touch. I think the idea is to really try to allow the people working in the practice to have good face time with people whilst they're in the practice. So, I guess there's no question that it does reduce the personal touch somewhat. But I guess what we've done is we've looked at the hard evidence as to what works and what doesn't. And but I think at those top 5% of practices, they worked very hard still to maintain the personal touch while the patient was present in the practice. Yeah.
Does Recall Manager take into account patient contact preference?
Okay, so, Bill, it's about time Bill answered one. I'm going to let Bill answer one.
Yes, Ian reminds us that within Exact there is the opportunity within the individual patient record to state what their personal preference for contact is. And if the patient has a contact preference set up, then Exact will follow that contact preference rather than the triage process I outlined earlier. So if the patient has a preferred method of contact of letter, then at the first recall, they will receive their preferred method of contact letter.
So this is quite an important point. It's a great question. So really, in the new version of Exact, the purpose of patient contact preferences really does take on a new meaning. So whereas historically we just used that method of contacting patients, if you want to continue doing that, that's absolutely fine, you can. However, if you want to automate and you contact the automation team in the office, or the recall team in the office, what they'll do is talk you through this. So if you have, what we recommend is, if you want to follow best practice, what you should do, and what this team will do for you, is run a search and change that goes through and clears the patient contact preference from your database. And that will mean that best practice is applied to all of your patients. However, what that then allows you to do is set on a patient-by-patient basis, where a patient objects to that best practice, you can set a recall method, and that will override that best practice process and always use that method to contact them. So what it really means is that patient preference takes on quite a different role, but there's some decisions to make there, and there's pros and cons to all of them, to all of the options, but the recall team within the office will step you through that in some detail so that you can make the decision that's right for your practice.
Can a patient file be set for a patient to opt out of being reminded? I have some patients who have been asked us not to remind them for recalls or reconfirmation of booked appointments, and they get quite grumpy if we do contact them. They're the sort of patients who've never missed a 6-monthly appointment in 30 years, so I see their point.
I have to say, I don't think that's possible, actually.
If they're not ticked on SMS, then they wouldn't receive the SMS if they don't.
True.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. If you don't tick SMS, then they won't be reminded with SMS. And if you don't have email selected, then they won't be reminded via email.
Importantly, that's an individual. You can set that for the individual patient rather than the practice as a whole.
Yeah. That got us thinking as well.
Question from Alan Rees. He said, "Thank you, guys. So what would you say is the weakest link in the system?"
Historically, the warm bodies that get in the way. So historically, reception had been faced with patients returning from the surgery and the system putting forward a number of prompts, and at different times, the same set of circumstances, the same prompt has produced a different option. Those using the system have chosen a different option, and that leads to unpredictability. In the surgery, the clinicians not revising the recall date to reflect the clinical circumstances that have occurred today and their effect on the recall. So version 11 has very much sought to take out or remove from the system the difficulties that some of those options have posed. So it's going to produce a much more reliable outcome.
Sorry, we've slightly gone in the dark here, but I think there is still a bit of a weak link in that patients, as I said earlier, is that the clinicians working chairside may not enter recall dates at all, and if that doesn't happen, you're not going to have your patients in your recall system at all. So I think one of the really important things is you need a continued awareness of that, and as I say, the support team can help you run a report for patients that don't have recall dates, and you can just pull them into the system. It's very easy to fix, but I think some of our practice managers would probably tell us that managing clinicians' behaviour in the surgery can be challenging at times. So yeah.
With so much reliance on electronic communication, has version 11 simplified or improved the email and SMS mobile number collection or updating procedure? For example, updating an email address, will it prompt to update existing family members as it does their address?
Is it Chris?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Chris, I'm really sorry. I don't know either. I apologise. I just don't know the answer to your question. Yeah. But ring the support desk. There are people there that are much more familiar with the product than I am. It's rather embarrassing.
And final question is from Pakan Mazari. If patients receive recall messages 1 month before they are due, they could receive the messages at the weekends. Can this be configured so they don't receive recalls over the weekend?
Yes. So the sending hours that are the practice open hours that you set up for SMS reminders, so that part of the system, that actually controls recalls as well. So if you set your practice hours 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday or whatever it is, it will not send messages outside of those hours. So that is handled.
The thing to do would be to have online appointment booking. That way, not only are they receiving their message at the weekend, they have the opportunity to book their appointment at that time when they've got the time to think about it and do it.
Thank you very much. We've had lots and lots and lots of questions this time, and sorry we haven't been able to answer all your questions tonight. But if you do email it to us, Software of Excellence will reply to all questions via email. So this leaves me to say thank you very much to Ben and Bill for a very informative lecture. I hope you all found it useful. Thank you to everyone here, our live audience, and those who tuned in as well online. And finally, thank you to our sponsors, Henry Schein. We hope to see you again in a couple of weeks for our Christmas special Tubules Live. Thank you and good night.